White House correspondent John Gizzi live on the North Lawn. John, thank you. And we also want to get the latest from Israel. So for that, let's bring in Tel Aviv correspondent Jotam Confino. And Jotam, what is the latest after this assassination?
Well, first of all, it's on everyone's mind here. The Israeli media is on top of this because it's, of course, a matter that is very interesting and curious to Israel, given that Iran is pointing fingers at Israel right now. They are holding Israel responsible. And like your senior White House correspondent just said, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu did mention this top Iranian nuclear scientist's name 2 years ago. So, of course, everyone is thinking that Israel is behind this. And if we go back in time just a little bit, 10 years ago, we saw a string of assassinations of top Iran nuclear scientists in Iran. And back then, Iran also pointed fingers at Israel. So this is part of the shadow war, if you will, that is going on between Iran and Israel right now. And of course, Israel will likely not comment on this matter.
In Iran, they have been chanting death to America and death to Israel since the regime took over in the late 70s. And my colleague, Dr. David Samadi, fled that regime. But we know that Benjamin Netanyahu has been at the forefront of warning not only the U.S. Congress in 2015 with a speech, but the UN about the dangers this Iranian regime poses. They seem hell-bent on getting a nuclear weapon. And obviously, this assassination will probably be showing people that that is an imminent threat. What do you think?
Definitely. And Netanyahu is not about to back down in any way. We know that 10 years ago also, he and his cabinet considered striking Iranian nuclear facilities, but they were persuaded or forced not to by Barack Obama. And since then, Netanyahu has been very vocal in his criticism against the Iranian nuclear program. He speaks about it once a week at least, and he sends threats to Iran. And he is really right now trying to deter Iran from going ahead with their nuclear activities. We hear a lot of reports about cyber attacks. We hear a lot of reports also about Israeli airstrikes in Syria against Iranian targets. In fact, we had 2 of those just this week in Syria.
Now, Israeli journalist Yossi Melman, who President Trump retweeted, said that it was possible that the Mossad was behind this. Do you think that Israel was involved? Do you think that the CIA was involved? Maybe this was a joint operation between the U.S. and Israel?
Given that I have studied this subject for a long, long time, and given that everyone here in Israel seemed to reach some sort of a consensus, I think it's very fair to say that there's a high possibility that the Mossad carried out this assassination, maybe with the help of CIA. We don't know that yet, but Mossad is highly likely behind this, yes.
And the other thing, too, Yotam, I wanted to add, a lot like the United States, there's a lot of political polarization in Israel. You have Benny Gantz and Prime Minister Netanyahu working together. So what is this all like with that government pretty fractured, a lot of division in the country like here in the U.S.? You have the liberals and the conservatives, very different on a lot of issues.
It's actually the only thing that they do agree on here. The government is very fragile. They disagree on literally everything but Iran. The defense minister, Benny Gantz, has the exact same policy as Netanyahu. He says over and over that Israel would do everything they can to prevent Iran from developing a nuclear program. The foreign minister is saying the same thing. Literally everyone in the Israeli parliament, besides the left wing, which is very small right now, agree that Israel should really do all they can, even if it includes cyber attacks or a possible military attack, to prevent Iran from going nuclear. So this is basically the only thing that they agree on right now.
And Yotam, I have another question for you. Obviously, we know that Hamas and Hezbollah, they do receive some backing from this Iranian regime. Have any of their leaders weighed in terms of, what the Palestinians and some of the Lebanese are thinking about this?
Not yet, but we also do know that Iran is sponsoring Hezbollah in Lebanon. Iran is sponsoring Hamas and Islamic Jihad in Gaza. And we do know that they, in general, cooperate on their alliance, so to say, against Israel. So in the coming days, we should be looking out for what will come from either the Syrian side of the Israeli border or from the Gaza border, because Iran will retaliate somehow. It could be cyber attacks. It could be attacks from cross-border attacks from either Lebanon or Syria into Israel, or it could be from Gaza. So we have to keep an eye on Israel's border in the coming days. And is the Israeli military is 100% ready, of course, this is what they're saying, for any attacks coming from their borders.
Jotam Confino live in Tel Aviv for us today. Thank you very much for your time, Jotam.